Good afternoon. Earlier today, the Prime Minister gave comment in response to serious questions about how an official of the Iranian regime was granted something called a temporary resident permit to come into Canada. This is somebody who should not be admissible to Canada because of his known and widely publicized links to a designated or listed terrorist organization in Canada. So in response to questions about this, he said, well, I can't comment on specific cases. That's ridiculous. Come on. Somehow, somebody in the government made a decision to override inadmissibility rules and issue this special tool to this person, which allowed him to get on a plane, land in Canada, and the only reason why we found out that he was in the country was because an independent journalist organization reported on it as such. So I'm sorry, the privacy rights or can't comment does not override answering questions on how this happened and how the government is going to fix it. Just a completely ridiculous answer that abdicates responsibility for the situation. And this has serious impacts for a lot of people in the country, and my colleague, the Deputy Leader, is going to speak about that.
Canadians deserve answers on how this happened, how a TRP was issued, by whom, when, if it was issued inadvertently or if it was done on purpose, and the admissibility or the dismissiveness of having somebody come here was inadvertent. All of these questions are still permeating for Canadians. They want to know why somebody in a Canadian-listed terror organization has more privacy rights than a Canadian. Everybody in the community, in the diaspora communities from coast to coast, from Vancouver, Toronto, and everywhere in between, wants to know why members of the regime get to step foot. And this isn't the first time it's happened. It will continue to happen unless the community gets answers for the government about why, how, when, and how many more times this is going to happen. This community is terrorized. We've seen gunshots into businesses of activists. We see phone calls of those with blurred-out backgrounds calling anybody that would listen to tell them about known agents here on the ground in Canada. If the government's going to take this seriously, it ought to take this seriously rather than having a number of positions on Iran.
I'm just going to say there's also one other concerning thing that happened in the last couple of hours, which is the Foreign Affairs Minister suggested that the decision to revoke the permit after it came to light through independent journalism was inadvertent. So did they intend for this person to stay in the country? This is just a disaster. And as my colleague says, what this does is increases tensions and increases a sense of lack of safety across the country. And frankly, I mean, this is a government that we just had an Auditor General's report that showed massive fraud in the student visa program. I mean, get it together.
The individual itself, correct me if I'm wrong, never set foot in Canada as if this person was denied entry to Canada. The government might say it's a sign that the system actually worked.
Oh, come on.
I'm just saying that they might say that. What I would like to hear is your answer to that.
They issued a permit to this person, even though he's clearly has significant ties to the Iranian regime. Come on. This guy was issued a permit. They made a conscious decision. I mean, to be clear, the process for issuing one of these permits is weighing whether or not somebody who would otherwise not be allowed to come into the country, like a terrorist, should be allowed to come into the country if the public interest would benefit. So they made a decision. They said, yeah, this guy should come into the country. Then he was allowed to board a plane. And during that time, that's when the news stories broke. It wasn't the government who proactively did this. It was journalists who said, hey, how did this happen? So no, that's a completely bunk response. The reality is that the process failed here, and today the Prime Minister went out and he said, sorry, I can't comment on that. I can't comment on specific cases that are all over the news.
So what would you like being investigated there.
We want to know why this person was issued a permit. When was he issued a permit? Why was he issued a permit? By whom was he issued a permit? And how many more times is this going to happen in Canada, where members of a listed terrorist organization are issued special permits, special ministerial permits to travel here? Nobody gets on a plane from Iran to come to Canada without some kind of permission.
Are you also willing to throw a stone at FIFA? Because this person is a member of FIFA.
The buck stops with the government. The buck stops with the government here.
But what about FIFA? This person is a member of an international organization.
Canada's immigration laws has specific rules for members of listed terrorist organizations in terms of whether or not they're allowed to come into the country. This person had serious ties to a listed terrorist organization, which is the IRGC. There are a lot of people in the country right now who have legitimate fears and have watched, as my colleague said, other members of this regime slip through the crack, and that should be the first priority, period. And also, without that, that's why Canadians are losing faith in the immigration system writ large. They see it as a dumpster fire because the government can't do basic analysis like, maybe we shouldn't issue a permit to this guy. There's no situation, there's no planet on which a high-ranking member, a member of a listed terrorist organization should be given a permit to come to this country. Crazy.
Canada has, I'm just going to answer, Canada has a long-standing history of isolating Iran in global forums.
Yes.
This week we've seen time and time again where Canada has been silent when the cameras were on, silent at the UN when they took a chairmanship, when Iran took a chairmanship to talk about non-proliferation and women's rights. They were silent again when our allies spoke up against Iran. Canada used to have a leadership role. There was once a government in this country led by Stephen Harper that walked out on the leadership of Iran in the UN, and now we are quietly giving them their support.
If I could, the immigration minister just walked through that door and told CBC News no IGRC officials were admitted to Canada. What do you react to that?
They issued him a permit. Somebody in the department, likely her, because of the level of the public profile of this person, signed off on that TRP. And the only reason that they were caught was because of an independent journalist. So it's a non-answer that doesn't get to the core of the issue that my colleague just raised. There has to be accountability here. How did he get a permit to begin with? Come on. Thank you.
Is it possible that the person was on the list, but FIFA put pressure on the government to let them in? Is it possible?
What do you make of this commitment from the Liberals to potentially privatize airports?
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, we've seen this happen around the world. My question is if there's a Brookfield connection to this, and I think that's something that people have to keep an eye on.
Are you concerned it could add higher costs for Canadians? Think of this promise to privatize airports.
It'll be interesting to see what the government does here. I think that's a very complicated issue, but I think they need to be more fiscally responsible. Maybe they wouldn't be selling off Canadian assets.
Are you concerned that this will mean higher prices for Canadians?
We're always concerned with this government about higher prices for Canadians because that's what their record shows.
Do you think Vancouver should get the defense bank?
So we're just wondering if you're worried it could increase costs for Canadians.
Well, any report I read said it would have the opposite effect, so I guess we'll see what the government ultimately decides. Thank you.
Ask you, what do you make about this privatizing airports suggestion from the government? Are you worried that it could mean higher prices for Canadians?
Well, yeah, absolutely. It's a terrible idea. I mean, we've seen privatization. You heard Abby Lewis talk about it this morning. We've seen privatization of garbage. We've seen increased costs there. It goes on and on and on, the privatization. It never works out for workers, never works out for communities. And right now, when it comes to airports, it's dangerous. I mean, this conversation came up decades ago, as you know, and it certainly didn't work out politically. But we're seeing this government looking at privatizing airports. Look, they're looking at privatizing the work that the commissionaires do, that veterans do, really important transition work when veterans are released from whether they're in the military or the RCMP. So it just seems like there's no end, and the story just gets worse and worse and worse.
Can I ask you, as a BC MP, what do you think of Jonathan Wilkinson being appointed as ambassador to the EU And how important will that work be given our trade war with the U.S.?
Well, I'll start with the fact that, I'm certainly not a liberal, and I don't believe, support liberal environmental policies. But when it comes to the liberal bench, Jonathan Wilkinson was an incredible leader when it came to standing up for British Columbia's coast. He helped, we put a lot of pressure on Jonathan Wilkinson to increase funding for wild Pacific salmon. He created the largest fund for wild Pacific salmon in this strategic salmon initiative. We pushed hard for conservation funding. He helped create some conservation funding with British Columbia and Ottawa. Jonathan Wilkinson obviously believed in climate change and the fact that we need to do more to mitigate it, and was clear that we needed targets to meet that. And he also opposed a tanker ban, supported a tanker ban on the North Coast. So he was probably the best liberal MP not in cabinet, but it shows why he was left out, because this government's going a totally different direction when it comes to conservation and when it comes to standing up for the environment and tackling climate change. So hopefully when he goes to the European Union, he can relay back to Mark Carney the important role that Canada plays in the global community when it comes to tackling climate change and standing up for our environment.
And do you think Vancouver should get the new National Defence Bank or the International Defence Bank? I forget the name of it. But
I'll let Don Davies comment about that. Certainly something that that is being looked at. But look, these ideas, whether it be a sovereign wealth fund, it's completely different than what Norway's doing. Norway has a sovereign wealth bank, for example, that invests in public good, not carrying bad political ideas like potentially carrying Danielle Smith's idea of a pipeline on the North Coast that no private proponent even wants to do on their own, and it's not supported by coastal First Nations. So, these ideas that they keep popping up and propping up, these privatization schemes, these investment schemes that are there to promote their political aspirations that have no economic sense or viability, they need to be put aside, and we need to put the public first. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Thank you. A new appointment.
Is that official?
It is official. The Prime Minister put out a statement today saying he's appointing him.
I got to trust you on that.
Yes.
It's great. Jonathan is one of the brightest minds I've worked with. Cares about Canada, and this is the next step in an amazing career. I've had him around the cabinet table for years and always appreciated his insight, and really a fan of the way he does business. So it's really great for him.
Can you tell us how much the government's going to lean on that position, though? Because during this trade war with the U.S., the Prime Minister seems to be really wanting to deepen ties with Europe right now. So how critical is that role?
Really good question. I would expect that, and knowing the way the Prime Minister does business, that he would have a direct link to Jonathan, and Jonathan would expect that. Jonathan is he's a practical guy. I've never seen a guy read as well as him and provide constructive criticism, so I think it's a real asset to have him in Europe. Yeah, especially if we have 3 years. So.
Okay. Is there anything on the online harms bill? Any development there?
He'll be the first to know.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
His appointment.
Well, I hope he discovers that there's a business case for Canadian oil and gas when he's over in Europe during this energy crisis that we're all going through.
La Banque de Défense? Oui, absolument. J'ai rencontré les gens de Montréal International, puis effectivement, je pense que ça pourrait être pour Montréal, pour le Québec, tant qu'à avoir la banque au Canada, ça devrait être à Montréal.
Qu'est-ce que selon vous pensez qu'il y a des atouts intéressants à Montréal, la capacité?
Bien, premièrement, on parle de défense, donc considérant que Montréal aussi est une grande sphère de développement de défense en aérospatial, entre autres, énormément de compagnies reliées à la défense. Déjà là, il y a comme un lien naturel qui peut se faire, et c'est au Québec.
In English, please.
No, thank you.
Montréal est une bonne ville pour accueillir la Banque de Défense.
Montréal est une excellente ville pour accueillir la Banque de Défense.
Pourquoi? Qu'est-ce qui fait en sorte qu'elle aurait des atouts selon vous?
Parce que, on a l'expertise financière, bien sûr, mais aussi on a un réseau, déjà un réseau d'organismes internationaux, organismes des Nations Unies. Donc, je pense que ça serait un très bel endroit pour la banque.
Can I hear you in English on
yes.
that? Why is Montreal a good idea for a good place for the
because both of this expertise in financial services and the fact that we have a large international presence already of multilateral organizations. Thank you. Merci.
Le Curam a déjà dépassé son budget de 5 milliards. Alors déjà, de vouloir continuer avec un 400 millions supplémentaires, puis ils ne nous ont pas expliqué pourquoi il dépassait de 5 milliards, je pense qu'il y a des questions à poser. Merci.
former IRGC guy got a temporary residence permit to Canada?
I'm not read in on that file, so I don't have anything to comment on.
Okay. Any thoughts on this this Bridger pipeline permit that President Trump gave to a pipeline company bringing oil from basically using the old Keystone XL?
I'd need to look a bit further before I can respond.
All right.
to you.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, those are my two questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Have a good day.
All right. GC guy got a temporary residence permit to Canada?
First I heard about it was QP.
Okay.
Don't know a thing about it, sorry.
All right. Former IRGC guy got a temporary residence permit to Canada?
Talk about needing answers. How did a terrorist get a visa into Canada? He is inadmissible to come to Canada, so somebody actually had to override that to give him a visa. That is the purpose of that TRP program visa. We need answers. We got none in question period.
Yes, how a former IRGC official got a temporary residence permit to Canada?
Look, I'll leave that to my colleagues who've got conduct of the file. I don't have information about the specific case.
Okay.
Okay. Have a great day, folks.
Got any thoughts on how this this former IRGC guy got a temporary residence permit to Canada?
Well, my understanding is he wasn't allowed in at Pearson Airport.
Yeah, but initially he was given a permit.
I guess we're going to find out, but again, the main thing is he's not allowed in, should never be in. There's no IRGC, leader or person who is a senior official of the IRGC should ever be allowed into the country. Unfortunately, he was denied entry, which I think is the right thing. He should not be allowed in this country. Thanks.
Thank you. Bridger pipeline, which is, I guess, it's a pipeline that follows the old Enbridge right-of-way, has been given sort of presidential assent from the United States. So President Trump wants to...
I missed that. Can I get back to you?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.